I'm thrilled to have Larissa Phillips as a guest on the show today. Larissa is an author and literacy educator. She's also a contributor to the Free Press, which is where I discovered her writing, where she often writes about, among other things, living in a farm in upstate New York. Her farm allows city kids to experience rural life. Larissa, welcome to Inner Immigrant.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for all your patience with our technical issues. I'm glad you're here.
Me too.
I wanted to have you on to talk about your recent essay for the Free Press about marriage. It was called "I Thought My Marriage Was Broken and Then I Stayed in It." You're Gen X. I wanted to start maybe with your childhood and the messages that you received about being a strong woman and whether or not being married or having kids was a part of that.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. So I'm totally Gen X. I was born in 1969. And so I grew up in the 70s. And by the time I was a teenager, divorce was really common. So pretty much everybody in my family got divorced, like sometimes more than once. And it was a whole series in my teen years, especially a whole series of kind of like getting attached to girlfriends or wives and then having them disappear, because the breakup happened, and some really like beloved aunts that I lost through those years. And and divorce was just completely common. I had, when I went to boarding school, and there was this one couple, two teachers that were married together, and I remember consciously thinking like, oh, this is it. Like that's how you do it. They have a great marriage. I thought they were so cool. They both were so smart. She was like the head of the math department, and he was an English teacher. They were so cool. And then when I was a senior, they got divorced. Mm. It was crushing to me, And so I really didn't know that. I didn't have any idea of a very cool marriage where the woman wasn't kind of oppressed or sad or, where you could be a modern the kind of person I wanted to be and still be married. I didn't know if you could do that.
Yeah. I think a lot of us didn't always have a good model because I'm an elder millennial. And so kind of the message from the secular culture, my parents were religious, so they very much valued marriage and family. But from the secular culture was definitely like, do everything you want to do, go to every country you want to travel to, achieve everything in your career. And only then is it acceptable to get married and have kids. And even then you don't want to have too many, right? There's a lot of rules.
Yeah.
Even when we were supposedly getting rid of all the rules
yeah.
For how women should have to live or what it means to be a strong woman. And I felt a lot of shame, actually, because I considered myself a feminist, but then I got married at 23.
Oh, wow.
I met him when I met him, and I knew that he was my person. And so I had kids at 27. I always wanted to be a mom, but I think there was a lot of message that it was kind of a shameful thing to want to do.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I feel
smart women wouldn't want that.
Yeah, if you were independent and smart and cool, you would do something more interesting and exciting. I probably would have had a third kid if I hadn't. Like, I regret not having a third child, and I think that was a lot of it. Was that it just seemed kind of like, okay, enough is enough. Like, you did the two, now get back to the real stuff.
Yeah, of achieving. And so growing up, kind of the idea is that divorce is liberating, right? And that being single is empowering.
And that's huge. And the stories right now are the essays. It's just like, it's a real trend right now of these essays about divorce as a means of empowerment.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I think it's very sad, and not that people should feel ashamed of being divorced, of course, and it's an automatic outcome. But for many people, but it's just it shouldn't be automatic. I see a lot of people, and I read a lot of these essays about people getting divorced for reasons that you're kind of still like, wait, why? Like, you read the essay and you're like, I don't understand why you got divorced. Or, as I mentioned in the essay I wrote for the Free Press, that I have friends who they're like, well, we're still best friends, and it's like, well, wait, you're still best friends and you have little kids. Like, well, maybe just stay together a little longer. Like, it just seems a little too easy at this point, a little too easily done.
I wrote a memoir. I've been married. I've been with my partner for 20 years, and I wrote a memoir where we went through some hard times in our marriage, and then we ended up staying together. And a lot of editors were like, it would be more exciting if you didn't stay together in the end, And I think what I liked about your piece is that you write about being married and thinking about getting a divorce. You don't make it seem, I feel like the choices in our culture is either kind of marriage is this perfect, which everyone knows that's not true, right? Marriage is hard.
Yeah.
Or divorce is wonderful. And everyone knows divorce is really hard too,
Yeah.
especially for kids. And
And
your
for
marriage,
women too. Women don't bounce
yeah,
back financially, certainly, and statistically, they suffer a lot from divorce.
right. And your piece kind of is more honest, where you talk about years where you thought, I don't know if we're compatible. How are we going to make this work? Maybe you could like speak about that a little bit.
Yeah, I felt like my husband and I had come together. Like when we first met, we were so compatible. And oh boy, here's the feedback. Is the connection bad?
A little bit, but keep going.
Okay. We were so compatible. And then it felt to me, never mind the kids and the money problems and the house that we were fixing up, it just felt like we had grown at different rates. Like I just felt like we kind of came together. We both had gone through some hard times when we were younger, and we sort of met, and we were like, we were kind of angry people and, sort of broken people, kind of trying to put ourselves back together. And I felt like I healed and he hadn't. And that, I mean, that was really how I felt. And I just didn't know if that made us compatible anymore. And so, but I mean, in some ways we kind of like couldn't afford to get divorced. So we did. And everything just kept moving so fast. And then we moved out of the city, and then we just kind of like healed. And now I feel like we're reaping the rewards, because it's so nice to have that history with each other. And I heard there's a marriage counselor, like a life coach named Penelope Trunk, she's like the autistic life coach, and I think she's hilarious. But she was saying that all long term relationships are a process of growing apart and coming back together. And you could apply that. It's not just marriage. It's siblings and friends and parents and children. I've had years with my kids that were harder than other years, and forget it, with my mother, like in and out, and my sister. Like we have. That's how long-term relationships are going to have ups and downs. It's not going to be so easy all the way through, but the reward for the longevity of the relationship comes, towards the end.
Yeah. You kind of make fun, I guess, a little bit in the piece of sort of these Instagram relationship advice things that we hear. Everyone's trying to have the perfect life, the perfect relationship. And I think you mentioned the bird theory. Can you explain that one?
I just started going on TikTok recently because my daughter has a puppy and she has a TikTok account, so I go on TikTok to see the puppy. And there's a couple of viral trends which I find fascinating. I just think TikTok's actually really fascinating. So there's this trend called the bird theory, and women, it's usually women, although now it's kind of, there's successive generations of the trend, but so now it's like people doing it with their children and whatever. But it starts with women videoing themselves talking to their boyfriends or their husbands and saying, just randomly, I saw a bird. And so then the idea is that the husband or the boyfriend is supposed to respond with interest.
Yeah.
It's actually adorable, because a lot of them are just immediately like, what do you mean? What kind of bird? Well, what did it look like? And they're like looking at it. They're like, wait, no, that's my favorite kind of bird. Are you kidding? Like they're totally into it. But even the ones who are sort of like nonchalant about it or distracted, it's still there. It's, I don't know. It's all done in a very like lighthearted spirit. And there were a lot of people I posted it on Twitter, and people were freaking out that it was a test, like an ugly test to put your partner through. And it wasn't, it didn't seem that way, but it's based on this idea about relationships called the bid theory. So it's actually very clever tweaking of it. The bid theory is that these people who studied marriages and relationships found that you could predict success of a marriage or a relationship by how often or how easily one partner responded to the other partner's bids for attention. So,
Mhm.
it is something random. I mean, these are the random things you say, oh, we're out of milk, or, I saw a bird, or, oh, look at that bird. And you want somebody, the successful relationships are going to respond because it's a request for attention and connection.
Mhm.
And actually it's really relevant. And, yeah, so I thought it's actually like very cool. I did it with my husband, and which was ridiculous because my husband is like completely like, I can like sigh, and from the next room I hear like, what's wrong? What are you sighing about? I knew how he would respond, and he likes birds also. So he likes birds more than I do. So it was like an easy, obvious one for us. But yeah, I mean, it's a good indication. They should respond. It's a good indication of a healthy relationship when you're responding to even just like kind of random requests for connection.
Yeah, and I think when we think about I had a friend who was single and very much wanted to be married, so people are marrying later and less often, and
Uh,
there's a larger proportion of adults who have never married. So, okay, the share of married Americans between the ages of 25 and 54 has dwindled from more than two-thirds in 1990 to barely half today. And then of the single people, 1 in 10 lives with a partner, so more and more people live alone. And so I had a friend who was single, wanted to be married in her late 30s, and she said the things that married people complain about, like the pros and cons of marriage are the same. Is like, I have no one to pick a fight with. Like, I have someone to pick a fight with. I don't want to pick a fight, but also I have no one to pick a fight with, you know? So that's kind of like, there's no one to be irritated because they're taking up half the bed, but also there's no one on the other half of the bed. And I felt like your piece kind of explained the both and of companionship, which is where you're talking about coming apart and coming together, but there's someone to share those moments with, the ups and downs.
yeah.
And even to pick a fight with. To say I had a really bad day and I'm really in a bad mood.
Yeah.
And I wish you would put your socks. It's sharing life, including the irritable, difficult moments with another human being. And I think a lot of people are craving that kind of community or tribe. But it's hard to admit that you want that because it can be stigmatized. Ironically, more for women when feminism was supposed to be about letting us choose to live however we please. But
Yeah. I mean, the feminist movement did famously leave out the idea of being a mother and how to make that possible for women to stay home with their children, which a lot of women wanted to do or want to do for 5 years or for 2 years or, it should be like the feminist movement just left that out, unfortunately, because it's huge and it's a problem. I've become like actually having gone from like talking about changing your mind, having gone from like a pretty, feminist kind of, eh, almost like anti-family young person to being like a hardcore pro-natalist.
yeah.
And it's not because of some sort of mystical idea or vague idea. It's because I really think that the family is the best system that we have for ensuring individual sustainability or individual health and welfare. And I think a lot about, I don't think we've talked enough about as a society about what's going to happen to not only like what's going to happen to we haven't even seen what it looks like when Gen X ages. When Gen X, so I have a lot of, like, I would say several of my friends, I don't want to say half, but it might be half of my friends didn't have children, half of my female friends. Like it was already pretty common not to have that sort of epiphany, like, I am going to have children after all. So I have a lot of friends who didn't have children. And when they get old, who's going to take care of them? I mean, we maligned this idea for so long, like, oh, you're not going to have, you shouldn't have kids, just have someone to take care of you when you get old. But the fact remains, who's going to take care of you? Because you can't, you need somebody to take care. You need family to take care of you, and
Yeah.
and going to look that way for Gen X, but and then millennials, it's going to be even worse. And then when Gen Z, a lot of whom are only children, so don't even have nieces and nephews. I mean, there've always been women who didn't have children, but they usually had nieces and nephews.
Mhm.
What's going to happen? They're only children. They don't have nieces and nephews. They don't have cousins. They don't have aunts and uncles. Like it's going to be, my mom is in her 80s, mid 80s, and you you need to either hire a social worker, a geriatric social worker who's going to take them there, and that is an industry, but it's never going to be the same as your child helping, even if you're in a nursing home, making sure bringing candy to the nurses' aides. You know what I mean? Like it's like really, it's a solution. The family is a solution to many problems. And I think it's a good thing. And we've spent like all of my lifetime, certainly maligning and dismissing the importance of family.
Yeah, I think Arthur Brooks is a great writer. He does the happiness class at Harvard, and he talks about religions as life hacks that have been developed over thousands of years. And so, a lot of times we look at them as intelligent, scientific people, and say these people are so primitive. Why did they take vows and do these weird rituals? And maybe it was part of a way of making a community work and making sure that, for example, women and children and elders were cared for. And we definitely live in a care deficit society. We've demeaned caretaking as a valuable or source of meaning. but then who does the caretaking, and it is important work. And I think the more we understand, for example, the needs of children, we realize how important that caretaking work, especially as you said, in the first couple of years really is. And so it's just kind of, we're in an awkward position where the popular view and kind of the science aren't matching up. Like, we know that kids do benefit from having a lot of time with a caretaker, especially at the beginning, to bond.
Yeah.
We know, we know that married people tend to live longer and have more sex and have more health. We know their kids tend to do better, but we don't want to stigmatize different lifestyle choices. And yet the science is kind of clear that there are a lot of benefits from living in a tribe or a marriage or a village.
Yeah. I mean, even the popular view, I feel like doesn't line up with sort of those kind of personal, sort of quiet feelings that people have, which is what, the popular view is, oh, you should go out and be single and stay single and whatever and have this fantastic sort of adventurous life. But then deep down, there's kind of, oh, well, I think I might want to have children though, or like, so it's, the popular view doesn't even line up with what I think a lot of us want deep down when it comes down to it. I mean, we want it all, you know.
Yes, that's the problem. Yeah, but I think even little things like I cook breakfast for my kids every morning because I work from home. We own our own business. We have a handmade furniture studio. And I have a friend who's like, you shouldn't cook for your kids. They can cook for themselves. And I didn't feel comfortable admitting that I get pleasure from feeding them. I enjoy it.
Like,
I enjoy watching them eat healthy food. And
like
it feels that it's regressive or something to say that, or it's coded as conservative. But it's actually very enjoyable for me to
I
care for them.
I always joke how my kids are grown up now. They're like 22 and 26. And I've been joking for a few years now that I'm like an old Italian mom who's like, you hungry? And I'm like running to the kitchen like at 10 o'clock at night to like make them, whatever. Like it's very enjoyable. I like to nourish them. And I like seeing my family. I like to cook and I like to feed people. So yeah.
Yeah. And there's so much class stuff that comes in too. I would love to talk about that, your thoughts on that, because, you know, second wave feminism said marriage is a bourgeois institution, it's middle class. And for a lot of working class people, I have a friendship with the lady who bags my groceries every week. And she says, I would love to be a stay at home mom and raise my kids. And for her, her job is not her source of meaning. She bags groceries, and a lot of people have jobs like that. And so family is a source of meaning for a lot of blue collar folks. And they would love to have bourgeois problems.
Yeah.
Like, that sounds great, actually. I would love a bourgeois life. And so it was kind of an elite conversation among women whose careers were very fantastic, about their lives that didn't always include the lives of lower class women, and
Yeah.
whose careers were never maybe their main source of meaning.
Yeah. Who are working, becoming a working woman, a working mother wasn't going to be that they were going to be a lawyer or surgeon. They were going to be doing data entry, or I mean something even worse, I think, than bagging groceries, because at least she gets to talk to people, but just very dystopian, um, unpleasant jobs that they now have to have in order. I also, there's the scandal going on right now in Minnesota with the daycares, and I was just I was like, there, a daycare with 100 children, come on, and I'm finding out that that's completely normal. That there are daycares with 1 to 200 children, and of course they're all separated into groups and stuff. But I just find that like horrific. Like I just don't. I think that's the wrong path. Like, like daycare should be little and cozy, and especially for little children, you should be emulating it on the living room, with the mother, not on the factory, the assembly. I'm really just kind of came out this morning that I'm like, daycares with 1 to 200 kids. It's
Yeah.
not, you know,
Yeah. Elder care and care for young children can't be this corporate thing. People need attention. They
yeah,
need attention. Has to be more personalized. It's the lady down the block, like you're describing, with a small group of kids
yeah, exactly.
in her home. So, how are you raising your own kids differently? You say you have kids now in their 20s. When you talk to them about relationships and finding a partner, than how you were raised?
So I've actually had some conversations with my daughter. I have two kids. I have a boy who's struggling with a lot of things. He's had a lot of the things that are sort of plaguing young men he's dealing with. Um, so I'm not talking about family with him. We're still talking about just kind of getting his life going, basically. But my daughter's 22, and I've been saying to her for years, I've been having these like taboo conversations with her where I'm like, okay, don't tell anyone I told you this. And I'm always like, you're going to do what you're going to do. I've been saying this since she was like maybe 18 or 19. You're going to do whatever you're going to do. And I respect whatever you're going to do. And I'm interested in how your life unfolds. I'm interested to watch it. I trust you and I have faith in you're going to make really incredible and interesting decisions. But my opinion, and you can take it or leave it, is that it's better to have children earlier. And I also think it's better to stay local. And she lives with her boyfriend, and he's from our area too. And I'm like, if you have children like in your 20s, first of all, you're going to have two youngish grandmothers who will be fighting over who gets to take care of them, and they will each be 15-minute drive from your house. And if you're going back to grad school, or you're, going to your job, and the kid gets sick, we will be driving over there to take care of your kid, so that it's just all like the whole thing. It's a whole complex, stay local, have your children kind of younger. By the time you're 30, you could have kids in, like say you had two kids, like in your, like kind of, even a little younger than you did, like, by the time you're 30, if your kids are in elementary school and you're local and they're taking the bus to their grandma's house after school, I mean, it's kind of a good setup.
Yeah.
Right? It kind of makes sense. It makes a lot more sense than moving across the country where you have no grandparents to help, and then waiting till you're in your 30s, and then by then your parents are getting kind of old. They can't help. They're too far away, and then they're going to start needing help. I mean, the further you get away from that original kind of classic model, the harder it gets.
Yeah.
Need money,
Yeah, I think it's funny that it's been coded as religious. To me, it's funny because the early Christians, many of them were celibate. And it's funny that Christianity has turned into this like fertility cult, because actually a lot of them didn't get married or have kids. But then that secular culture has left some of this stuff, because if you think about what you're saying, a lot of it is just very practical, science-based. Like right now I'm recording a podcast and my kids are at their grandma's. Their grandma lives 3 blocks away. That makes my life a lot easier because I'm not paying for childcare right now. And some of these things are just incredibly practical. It's easier to be pregnant. I've been pregnant in my 20s. It's easier on your body than in your 30s. And so it's hard to talk about these things because they're coded as religious or conservative, but some of them are just kind of biological facts that it's a lot easier to have free childcare. Like you said, a grandma who's fighting to have time with her kids and who's active enough to be able to be in their life, than to be, caring for someone who's very much at the end of her life at the exact same time that you're caring for a newborn. That's a lot of work. And we put women and families and men as well in really difficult situations sometimes, by waiting to the very last minute or not being able to conceive. So many people now who want to have kids have waited and they can no longer, they're no longer fertile. So those are kind of hard truths. And I think you're kind of a brave writer to talk about them, because I'm sure you get,
it feels flat. Like I'm breaking taboos, and it feels really wrong. And when I was writing that essay, the first essay I wrote about being a wife, I was becoming a wife, and I kept joking that I couldn't even say the word really. Like, what people would be like, "What are you writing about?" I'd be like, "I'm writing about being a what?" Like it just felt so wrong. And but yeah, I think there's a fear that if you have children too early, you will never go back to work. And I think that's totally obsolete. It's a totally obsolete fear. You do not have to, first of all, you do not have to get into your career by the age of 22. I mean, I'm sure there are some industries, like if you want to be a corporate lawyer, like what is it called? A white glove lawyer, like, okay. Or you want to be a surgeon, you've got 16 years ahead of you, whatever. Okay. You've got to make some decisions early. But my family's not like that. My kids are not. My daughter's going into education, and she's got to, I have friends who have kids, they get a master's degree, they have a little bit of a career, they have kids, and then they discover some passion, usually through their kids, like, dealing with autistic kids or dealing with dyslexia. And then they go back to school in their 30s and they have a whole new career. Like, it's just not true that if you have kids too young, you will never go back to work.
Yeah.
And I think that was the original fear, was like, get the career done first, because otherwise it'll be too late and you'll be chained to the stove.
Yeah, and be sad. It's like you're gonna be a woman in a John Updike novel who's just taking like Quaaludes all day and drinking.
Yeah,
It's really depressed. And it's of course nobody wants to be that woman. So I mean, there's a legitimate fear from the 1950s of people who were trapped in loveless marriages and they didn't get to choose what they wanted to do as a woman. And I think many boomers were responding to that experience of people who got knocked up and got married and felt trapped. But now there are a lot of choices, and there should be more conversation about what brings you joy. And there should be maybe periods or eras in your life where some women want to take a time and focus on the home and then go back to work, like you're saying. People live a long time and they can have chapters.
totally. You can have chapters. Exactly. I think that's a good way to look at it is chapters. And
Yeah.
wrong with, I mean, there really is nothing wrong with staying home for several years with your kids in terms of career. Like, I always loved the fact that Sandra Day O'Connor, who I think was the first woman on the Supreme Court, stayed home with all three of her kids until the youngest one was 5.
Wow. I didn't know that. That's very cool. And we have who is she now? She's a conservative, but Amy Coney Barrett, I think she was like
Oh,
7 kids.
oh yeah.
She's the Supreme Court justice. I'm like, do you have multiple versions? I don't know how she does that, but somehow apparently some people do that.
Did.
So lots of different ways to be a woman and to live your life. And there's not, for me, with being wanting to be a writer, I always wanted to be a writer. There were so many think pieces about have one. It was always one. And I was like, why one? Why does it have to be one? It was either 0 or 1. And that was the only acceptable way to be a woman writer. And I ended up with 3. So
That
just
makes us,
contrarian.
yeah.
um, do you like writing for the free press? Is that a place where you're able to be a contrarian and kind of think outside of some of these binaries or?
Yeah, I love the free press. I'm so grateful all the time that I have crossed paths with them, and I have an amazing editor. And um, I really, yeah, I've always been a writer. I hate pitching. I'm really bad at pitching. So if I don't know, I'm just like so lucky. I think about this all the time. Every time I'm writing an article, even as I'm like tearing my hair out because it's not working and it's, it's hard and whatever. And I'm always just like so grateful that I have deadlines and I have an editor who is really just interested in what I'm trying to say. So sometimes she'll give little pushback about something. I'll be like, no, it's this I'm trying to say, and she's like, oh, right. Like I have a fantastic editor, and I'm a huge fan of the free press.
Bari Weiss is kind of a lightning rod because people don't know where to put her, and she confuses people that is she super MAGA? Is she a critic of MAGA? But you're describing a workplace that I think sounds like a writer's dream.
I people I've always thought it was like sort of silly how people would talk about having women bosses and because I've had women bosses and they weren't that much different than male bosses. There's just the same variation. Like some of them were cool and some of them weren't. And I never I was always like, yeah, the female workspace, female run workspace, whatever. But the free press is actually like a really warm, wonderful, and lovely place to work. Like it really is like the dream of like what it would be like to have an editor in chief who's a woman. Even though I think Barry is totally extraordinary and unusual and doesn't necessarily even fit any of our stereotypes of what it is to be a woman. I think she's extraordinary. I think when people say she's a once in a generation talent, I totally agree. It's the only thing that's hard about writing for the free press is especially now as it's gotten more leverage and people normies are finding out about Barry in the free press. I'm getting a lot of pushback from family and friends who are horrified that I'm her, and they think she's a right wing extremist, and they think that she's going to destroy democracy, and she's on a leash to Donald Trump, and I mean, just all this. They've just heard a lot of stories about her that I think are completely untrue in my experience. So
Yeah, and I think there's also a lot of envy because Bari Weiss was really brave to, criticize the way she was unfairly treated at the New York Times, and now she's been tremendously successful. So from woman to woman, we should say good for you.
no,
Good for her.
yeah, you would think that. I mean, she's a lesbian. She's married. You would think that this would be a moment of kind of like like excitement and joy for women across the board. I mean, she's just extraordinary.
It
But
just goes to show that even in the 1950s and today, women really can't win because you're criticized no matter what. So you might as well do like what really feels in
yeah,
alignment and brings you joy because you're going to be criticized no matter
totally.
what.
And I think that might be part of one of her secrets to success is that I'm sure she's such a nice person. I'm sure she does feel all of this, but she's able to keep going on without getting approval from everybody. And I think that that is kind of like a very female thing for many people, many women, is to, we want to be liked.
Yes. It's very hard to know, like, I was the first of my friends to get married bringing it back, and I had friends who were so upset with me, but it's very hard to really be grounded in your own deep, sacred knowing, whatever that is, whether it's career,
Yeah,
relationship, of what brings you joy and what's right for you, because women wanna be liked, and we don't enjoy the criticism. Bari
yeah,
Weiss seems to be a person who can handle it.
yeah,
She seems to be handling it just fine.
yeah. I have so much. I'm really excited to see what she does with 60 Minutes and CBS News and everything. I have so much faith in her.
Yeah, and I think some of the criticism is unfair because if you actually read the Free Press, there's a lot of criticism of the Trump
Oh
administration.
my God, I ran into in Brooklyn. I ran into an old friend of mine, and she reads the Free Press, and we were talking about how everybody hates Barry and the Free Press, and she was like, all you have to do is say, look at the Free Press. Like, have you read it? And then most of them haven't, and so then they go look. Even if you don't subscribe, you can look at the stories that are there, and then they're like, oh yeah, huh, you know.
Yeah,
Or you look at what her podcast honestly, and you look at the topics and the people she talks to, and it's like this is not a MAGA far right extremist person.
that's right. Well, you have had such an interesting life because you lived in Brooklyn, you grew up super progressive, feminist. You had parents who didn't believe that we should have more than like 2 kids because of the world was gonna end from overpopulation.
Yeah.
And now you're like, "Have kids," and you live in a rural community. So, do you think moving to a rural community from a big city is part of those changes in your thinking? How did that change you living in the biggest, most exciting city in the country going to a small town?
Yeah, I think it was hugely influential. We lived in Park Slope, Brooklyn, which is like the
Okay.
of progressivism. And I was very much at home there. It was like my people, I was just imbued with the ideology and the sort of culture there. Very, very much my home. And we moved upstate because we wanted, almost like as a continuation of the vibe in Brooklyn, we wanted local food, and we wanted, to get back to the land and be more environmental and all this. And so we moved up in 2010, and because we didn't have a ton of money, um, we we bought in a county that's very red. We didn't buy a place in Woodstock or even in Kingston, which is up and coming, or in Westchester. We didn't buy, an hour outside of the city. So we went way up, like 3 hours north, and every lawn sign was red letters, you know, and Trump wasn't around yet. But then when Trump came around, then there were Trump signs everywhere, and it was to me it was very depressing and scary at first. Like I was really distressed about it. I really liked the property, but I was like, what are we doing? This is crazy. And I didn't I just felt really out of place. And I just through the years, like I don't know. We have great neighbors, nice, good neighbors. Just the whole aspect of like rural life where someone who you're supposed to hate because they have a Trump bumper sticker or something, but they just stopped. They saw you shoveling your driveway and they just stopped and snowplowed it for you, or they helped you find your dogs who were lost, or they bring your hay over. Like it just was impossible to hate these people. And this was happening at the same time that back home in Brooklyn, the hatred for not only for Trump but for anybody who liked Trump was just going insane. And that divide just kind of became exponentially wider and wider as that, because I like that's crazy. Like you don't even know anyone. I mean, there were people who were like, I fired my real estate agent because I found out she liked Trump, and I'm not going to shop at that store anymore. And I thought it was so dumb too, because it's like, who do you think's growing your food? Who do you think's fixing your roads? Like, you know what I mean? Like you're making this like sort of showy move to fire your real estate agent, but all your food was grown. But the guys working the fields or whatever. Like the Trump supporter or the MAGA or the people right of center are part of this country, and they're
Yeah.
why you're able to eat and and survive in the city. I don't know. I just thought it was ugly and short sighted and performative also.
Yeah, yeah, like, we can bond over hating the same people, or we could bond over mutual love, And it's really easy to bond over like the same hatred, but the deeper friendships are over shared life, mutual love. Like we both love our town, we both help each other's kids, we both shovel each other's walks, the things you're describing about. And those things, those relationships across difference are so important because it's hard to hate anybody up close. So
Yep.
whether that's a conservative who meets a really cool person who's trans or queer, or that's a progressive who meets a really nice guy who's a cowboy, who's a conservative, like
Uh,
you can't demonize that person when you actually know them and you know what a good kind guy they are. And I think your writing is really interesting because you're one of the few people who has lived in both spaces. And more people would benefit from kind of like a study abroad program within the United States, you know?
yeah. Yeah, I was talking to my father-in-law, was just visiting for Christmas, and he was talking about how we should have national service, and that would be one of the outcomes. One of the benefits would be that young people would, as they're, building a dam or digging ditches or whatever they're doing, logging, they would meet people from all across the country. And it used to be even like I was telling him how Coleman Hughes, who writes for the Free Press, I think it was him who said that when he went to college, he had a roommate who was from the Midwest, a white guy from the Midwest who was a Republican. I'm pretty sure it was him who said that, and that he was like, oh, like we're guess what, we can be friends, and that doesn't even happen in college now because you can choose. People are becoming more and more segregated in their college dorms, and yeah, it's just yeah. The more you have contact with other people, the more you realize that these are what flag you fly is a superficial aspect.
Right. Like the least important thing about you in some ways are your opinions, and the most telling things about you in some ways are how you actually live your life. So you can be driving a Prius, and signaling all these things that you care about the environment, but really, you're on a plane every other weekend. There's all these things where we're all hypocrites, right? Whether you're conservative or progressive, we
Yeah,
can be hypocrites, and it's much more telling when you share life with somebody. And I think your writing is very interesting because our enemies are the politicians who are corrupt, who are mistreating us, but our enemies aren't really necessarily one another. And actually, that probably benefits those kind of corrupt politicians if we're so busy hating one another that we're not actually working together to try to elect someone who's going to do a good job, or we're not able to listen to each other in order to put forward a candidate that someone in a rural community might actually be able to vote for
yeah,
instead of just telling everyone in that community that they're stupid.
yeah.
That's
There-
not super helpful.
I mean, that was the other thing, was that I discovered that the people who lived up here were much more complex and um, interesting, and they weren't all the sort of indicators that would have made me like think somebody was a bad person, like that they were racist or they were homophobic, weren't necessarily true. They might be true, weren't necessarily true, and they were absolutely not true for many people. So, yeah, people are just a lot more complicated and complex than the political landscape would lead us to believe.
Yeah. How do you make your farm work in this economy? Like, how do you do it? I can't imagine like a tiny little small family farm in 2025. How does that work?
Yeah, farming in general is really not cost effective or profitable. And I'm always thinking how, like, I'll get some eggs, I'll have like a dozen eggs, and I'm like, I'll sell them to my friend for $5. And I'll be like, okay. When I used to work still in the city, I would bring down like maybe 6 dozen eggs and I'd sell them. And I'd be like, I got $30. And I'd be like, if I could multiply this by like 10,000, then we're talking. Like that's how it happened. That's how we got industrial food systems, because it's just such terrible profit margin. So there was one year where I was like, I'm going to make the farm work. And I talked to all these people who I thought had really successful farm businesses, like they had websites or they had cafes. And I was like, I'm going to make my farm profitable. And they all laughed at me because they were like, you're never going to make it profitable. You're lucky if you break even, and you do it because you love it and you love the lifestyle. And these were successful, they were successful farms. So we don't make any money. We probably lose money, but I do the farm stay. So that's how we break even. Is I have as you mentioned in the beginning, I have families come up, they stay. We have a little barn apartment, and they stay, and they bring their kids, and the kids learn how to do farm chores. They spend 2 hours with me in the morning, and that's been really fascinating on its own because um, Not that I would ever suggest that everybody should, of course, not people are not going to go, we're not going to go back to farming. Like the trend towards urbanization is unstoppable, and it's going to increase, ever increasing. People around the world are becoming more and more urbanized, but we should at least be aware of what we're losing, and we're losing a lot. And it's basic things. Like, I mean, these kids are, they have trouble like pulling a wagon. You know, I feel if I weren't doing so many other things, I would get a degree in occupational therapy and I would make I would make this like an OT retreat, because they don't know how to, they're just like very undexterous, and they're helpless. And I mean, some of it's parenting. Like, I had these kids, a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and they got hay in their boots, and I was like, okay, let's get your boots off, you can sit over there. And it was hay in their shoes, they had sneakers, and they sat down and they stuck their feet out to me to take their shoes off, and their sneakers were Velcro sneakers. Like, that was like the crowning. I was like, what? No. I was like, no, you guys can take those off yourself. And they were like, no, we can't. And I was like, I think you can. And I just kind of like did something else, sort of ignored them. And they took them off, of course, because of course even a 3-year-old can take, but certainly a 5-year-old. And but so that kind of thing happens. But then they haven't handled, they don't handle wheelbarrows or hoses even. I can even tell, when a kid comes from the suburbs, you can see the difference, because in the suburbs they know how to hold a hose. I mean, really, it's striking. Like I'll be like, okay, you need 2 hands, and whatever for 2 or 3-year-old, of course, but like 5-year-old, 2 hands, take a step forward, like just managing. I mean, it's just interesting. It's like a lot of sort of manual skills that they just don't have, and then the fear and yeah, it's a really good. It's like how it's always been, sending the city kid to the grandparents' farm in the country, where they're gonna learn how to do some work. Like it really is like a fundamental thing that needs to happen on some level.
Yes. And it's again this progressivism, right? Is that things are always getting better, but sometimes there were things that were better in the past. I mean, sometimes kids worked harder in the past. Like, we live above a wood shop, and my kids work in the wood shop. And there's a lot that can be learned from engaging with material reality. It's right or it's wrong. You talk about how kids in the rural community, like, it's right or it's wrong when you do something on the farm versus everybody's great. Everything's good and very
So,
different versus the city.
yeah, that's so true, because they're just facts,
Mm. Yeah, like your chair, I can't sit in it. It's when with woodworking is very unforgiving in that way, but it's also so rewarding to build a chair that you can sit in.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
either a functional piece of furniture or it's not.
No,
Um,
totally. And these kids have been raised with this just sort of general ideology, which I raised my kids with too. There's no everything's infinite, everything's possible. There's nothing's impossible. And it's like, no, some things are something that's wrong. The way you're doing that is wrong. I can't eat the wrong food to the pony. There's definite like boundary.
Consequences for your actions, and and it's not so soft because, I mean, I don't know. There's a difference in rural communities. I think one of the differences is also progressives are very. I consider myself a liberal, and we want to give aid, government aid to people. But if blue collar working class folks, and that's my husband's family, they very much pride themselves on being able to do things, and they want the government to make it easier for them to own a productive piece of property or own a small business. It's a pride thing. It's a culture thing. That's different is I might need assistance, but I don't want it. I'd prefer, right? And so having kids come to that community and learn how to work and learn just kind of a different culture than what's in the city where you more are a customer instead of a
Yeah,
producer.
yeah, yeah. You want it now, because I'll have kids. Everybody loves looking for eggs, and the kids get a little obsessed with it. And there's nothing I can do about it. Like, there's no eggs. There's do. And they really, I feel like it is because they are such consumerists, and not the kids, but that's the culture, and they're used to, well, let's go to a different store if, or whatever. Like yeah, it's real. I think it's really good for them to have these, to hear no sometimes.
Oh my gosh. When I was a new mom, I went to a mom's group and there was this other kind of bougie mom like me. And she said, I'm going to raise my child to never hear the word no. And I thought, your child is not going to be fluent in the English language. Like,
Yeah.
how are you going to
Yeah.
communicate not to run into the streets? Like, this isn't going to work. It's funny to make fun of. And I think your work does it very kindly, sort of the excesses of city or the rural community.
Yeah.
the excesses of the rural community is kind of like, "Come over here, I'm gonna beat you." You don't wanna do that,
Yeah.
but you don't also wanna do that. I'm never gonna say the word no. I mean, come on,
Yeah.
you can't burn the kitchen down.
I learned a lot about parenting and through because I've been doing it now for several years, many years, and I have a lot of immigrant parents, like Chinese or Indian, kind of like they work in tech or they work at the UN, and they're very strict.
Mm.
And it was fascinating for me to watch them as like a very progressive parent. Uh, oh, that's I learned a lot. Like
Yeah.
good. I like.
Yeah. Well, I think you're wonderful. I think your writing is wonderful. You're on Substack, you're on Twitter, but mostly on the Free Press, sometimes on Quillette. I hope people seek you out, Larissa, and read your stuff because it kind of explodes the boxes and it's always interesting. I love that you write first person essays and kind of a memoir style, and I hope that we get to hear more from you in the future. So I really appreciate you sharing a little bit about your life with us, and I hope people will look you up and read more.
Thank you so much. That was really fun to talk to you.
Thank you for your time.